Wow, thank you very much, Cecilia, for the kind introduction and, of course, for this very privileged invitation to come here and address the College of Social Studies at this annual banquet. It's a true honor, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Also, thanks to the rest of the CSS faculty and administration. Martha, in particular, is key in getting me here. So let's get started. Well, as we sit here, I wanted to share with you a unique view of where we are, which is, of course, planet Earth. So thanks to NASA, this, as you can see here, is a real-time live HD video stream of Earth from space. And you can visit it anytime. It's pretty amazing. And the reason I bring this up is it just gives us, I think it's useful to keep this in perspective as we go about our daily lives. You know, we wake up in the morning, we have some breakfast, we go out into the world and do a little something, come back home, go to sleep, and we think this is normal. But actually, in a more galactic perspective, it's anything but normal. In fact, it's extraordinarily rare. So just to give you an idea of how rare it is, I've brought up here what's called the rare Earth equation, which computes the probability of there being a living planet in the Milky Way, which consists of approximately 100 billion stars, like the one we're orbiting around. And without going into all the details, N is the 100 billion suns, and the stuff to the right of it is all sorts of qualifiers, such as the appropriate distance between the planet and the sun, so it's not too hot or cold, the existence of a sufficient atmosphere, and all sorts of things like that. And to cut to the chase, N is between 0 and 10 in 100 billion stars. Okay, so that's just how rare this gift that we have here on Earth as a living planet is. So let's see what's happening on this planet. Well, for about 4.5 billion years, which is the age of the Earth as far as we know, it's not exactly clear what happened on the planet. There may have been some dinosaurs and a meteor. We think there's about 7 ice ages. Who knows, there may have even been some previous civilizations that didn't leave much of a trace. But let's fast forward 4.5 billion years to 1 AD, when there were approximately 250 million people on the whole planet. Now, as you can see here in this population graph, by 1804 it reached 1 billion after a very long period of slow, steady growth. And then by 1927 it hit 2 billion. And really since then we've been on an almost vertical trajectory. And that's because population is compounding. It grows exponentially, not arithmetically. And so if you look at this in contrast to what scientists call a carrying capacity, which is a principle that's applied to different ecosystems and environments, and without going into too much detail, it compares the rate of availability of resources with the rate of consumption of those resources by the host population. And there are different estimates about the carrying capacity of Earth, which range from as low as 4 billion to as much as 14 billion. A conservative estimate is about 10 billion people, which we will reach by 2040, which are estimated to be about 10.5 billion people on Earth by 2040. So we have 23 years to reach a conservative estimate of the carrying capacity of this planet. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things, and we've already seen a lot of consequences of the size of the population. Things are going to get more competitive. More people are going to be competing for the same resources, or perhaps some increased number of resources, the same water, okay, the same electricity, the same education, schools. You know, if you thought it was hard to get into Wesleyan for you, imagine what it'll be like for your kids. And the same jobs, of course, too. So, but let's see what other impacts there are. One thing is that road deaths are accelerating. More cars on the road, particularly in developing countries where the infrastructure is not as good. This results in death and injury. In fact, 1.25 million people died in 2013 from road deaths, many more injured. And if the trends continue, it will be the third leading cause of death and injury by 2020. So that's one example. But let's see what else is happening here on Earth. Even though 71% of the planet is water, it's kind of ironic that 30,000 people die every week from lack of access to water, to safe water. And 90% of those 30,000 people are children. If you look at just the continent of Africa alone, 345 million people in Africa lack access to clean water. So they've said, it's been said that the next war may be fought over water. Let's see what else is happening. Well, we have this wonderful thing called the internet, which popped up in the late 20th century. And as fantastic as it is, and all the access to information and information itself is, the access is unequal. In other words, places that don't have internet access, places with large populations don't have internet access, and there are other places with very few people that have tremendous amounts of internet access. So that's what's shown here on this map. Is in white, many people, many IP addresses, internet protocol addresses, measure of the number of internet connections. And then in red, few people, but many IP addresses, so just kind of an excess of internet connections. And then in blue, many people, no IP addresses. Okay, so you would like to see the map mostly in white, right? Many people, many IP addresses, or few people, few IP addresses. But instead what we see is a predominance of red and blue. So what else is happening? Well, we are slaughtering species, some of them endangered, despite bans, in order to fuel our consumption for things like cosmetics and perfumes and soaps, which come from these whales that you see here, that were slaughtered, about 300 of them off the coast of Norway, which now is the winner in the number of whales killed per year, has recently overtaken Japan, despite the International Whaling Commission's ban on commercial whaling in that territory. So, this is just one example of how far we're willing to go for the things that we want. And of course, there are other examples that are even more severe in the cases of certain tigers, rhinos, elephants that are going extinct. But we want their tusks, and we want their ingredients for our stuff. So, and we may say, oh well, I'm not the one, slaughtering the whales. But the fact of the matter is, this is what humans, collectively, us Earthlings, are doing here on the planet. Now, has anyone noticed the temperatures in the winter have been, a little hotter than normal recently? Anyone? Like, for instance, this February, I don't know what the temperature was here in Middletown. It was about 70 degrees in Boston. Yeah, okay, there we go. A few hands in the air. Yeah, so you're not imagining things. Things, temperature, weather is getting warmer. And while that might be pleasant for us right now in these nicer winters, down the road it might not be such a nice thing. So 2014 was the hottest year on human recorded history in terms of average global temperatures. But then guess what? 2015 was hotter than 2014. And then guess what? 2016 was hotter than 2015. So 3 years in a row consecutively we've had the hottest years on the planet. And I don't think it's a coincidence. In my view, 3 strikes, you're out. There's a clear pattern there, and a signal that it should be heated. So there's no doubt that the temperatures are rising overall. And so what does this mean? Well, the ice caps are melting, right? And the sea levels are rising. Environmental Protection Agency has reported that sea level has risen by 6 to 8 inches in the last 100 years. If you look at the overall trend in the last 100 years, imagine trying to fill a bathtub the size of the planet, or 71% of the planet, by 6 to 8 inches. Imagine the volume of water you need to have in order to make it rise by that amount. Even though it doesn't sound like a lot. And there are some estimates that it's significantly higher than 6 to 8 inches, in fact. So the result of this is that certain ecosystems, animals, are being left stranded and ecosystems disrupted. But that's not the only impact. In fact, humans, too, are now affected by sea levels rising. We once thought it was something that was going to happen down the road, but here we are. This is the last standing house on Holland Island in Maryland, on the Chesapeake Bay. And as you can see, it's been consumed by the sea. So the future that we feared of may not be so far off as we think. And in fact, I believe that we are on a path to planetary disaster, both socially and environmentally, and that those two things are actually feeding on each other negatively to exacerbate this problem. Now, I don't know whether planetary disasters are going to happen in 23 years when we reach the carrying capacity, or in 50 years, or in 100 years. But I think it's pretty clear that the signs we have all around us point to that direction. And some argue that it's already irreversible. I'm not willing to go that far. I think many things, it's hard to say that it's irreversible, but even in that gray area, I think it's pretty clear what we have to do. We have to act. And the biggest enemy in all this is actually apathy. Is not caring, or just thinking it's going to take care of itself, or just thinking that, well, hey, Earth will be okay long enough for my lifetime. And that's the kind of thinking that's prolonging and deepening these problems. So what are we going to do about it? Anyone have any ideas? Who's going to save us? How are we going to address some of these problems and become more sustainable on the planet? Any ideas? No? Okay. Will government save us? Isn't that the traditional role of government, to look out for the common good? Can't we rely on enlightened leaders like JFK to save the day? Well, yeah, I mean, traditionally that was the role, and that was part of our social contract that we agreed to, right? We've all read here the social contract thinkers, Rousseau and Locke, right? You still reading that in the CSS, yes? Okay. Yeah, so so we sacrifice a little bit of our personal liberty, or in some cases a lot, and to form a government which will defend and protect us and serve the public good, right? Well, uh, there may be some countries that have governments really serving the public good, but I don't think we live in one of them, and I think that um, in many countries across the world, corruption is rampant. So, in short, I think the answer is no. Governments won't save us. In fact, they're too busy drilling the Arctic for oil. That's right. As the ice caps are melting and the sea levels are rising, and all sorts of terrible things are happening, U.S., Canada, Russia, China are trying to seize land in the Arctic and breaking up the ice in search of oil. And this is great. Ice caps are melting. Instead of trying to prevent them from melting, we're breaking them up faster. So this is the kind of governments that we have today that are primarily serving corporate interests, if you ask me. The corporations that are funding the campaigns of these politicians to get them in office and keep them in office and lobby and pay them $500,000 a year consulting arrangements to advise them on certain issues when in fact we really know what that money is going for. So no, I don't think governments are going to save us, and I think that we really have a wonderful person now in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt. This is a man who sued the EPA 14 times and has attempted to block many EPA regulations trying to prevent climate change and protect the environment. Now this man's running the Environmental Protection Agency, and this is someone who has been said to have ties with big oil, and so far we've been able to document at least $300,000 from interests close to the fossil fuel industry. This is great, huh? Yeah. So let's see, who else might save us? Are NGOs going to save us? Well, NGOs are doing great work and have been for a long time, and I don't mean to dismiss or discredit them in any way. In fact, I've worked on a number of NGO projects, and what I've noticed is that there's funding for a project to make some sort of intervention and metrics that are measured before and after the intervention, and some target impact. And many of the times, the impact is made, and there are successes. But then eventually what happens is the funding dries up. Maybe it's continued for a year or two, but then eventually the project is no longer supported, and there's this hope that things will just kind of continue on in their own way. But most of the time what I see is that it doesn't continue, that things more or less revert to how they were, with some improvements, of course. But it also doesn't, neither does it scale to other places. It just kind of has had an impact in that location, and that's about it. It's been said that India is a graveyard of pilots, pilot projects of NGOs, etc. I have contributed to that graveyard myself. It's a tough problem. So one of the reasons NGOs struggle to scale, in my opinion, is that they can't tap into large pools of capital because they don't have equity that they can sell to investors. which investors can then make money off of in the markets through acquisitions or public offerings, etc. And so, although there are some large foundations and nonprofits and multilateral institutions that are very well funded, Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, etc., compared to the overall, capital flows of financial institutions and markets, this is just really a drop in the bucket. And NGOs are really cut off from that kind of access to capital, which I believe is necessary, is needed to scale to meet the enormity of the problems that we face. So, if it's not NGOs, who's it going to be? Enter social entrepreneurship. So, to contrast entrepreneurship with social entrepreneurship, I thought I'd pick a well-known economic theorist who I hope are still reading here in the CSS. At least I remember reading Mr. Joseph Schumpeter. And so let's look at his definition of entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur is an innovator who implements entrepreneurial change within markets, where entrepreneurial change has 5 manifestations: the introduction of a new improved good, introduction of a new method of production, the opening of a new market, the exploitation of a new source of supply, and the carrying out of the new organization of any industry. This is 1934. Now, this is a very clear, practical, scientific definition of entrepreneurship. But does it lack anything for anyone? Does it seem like it's missing anything? Anyone? No, it seems perfect. Okay. Well, for me, I don't know. It's kind of lacking a soul, sense of meaning or values or purpose. It's pretty dry. So let's look at Bill Drayton's definition of entrepreneurship. This is 1978. Whenever society is stuck or has an opportunity to seize a new opportunity, it needs an entrepreneur to see the opportunity and then to turn that vision into a realistic idea and then a reality and then indeed the new pattern all across society. We need such entrepreneurial leadership at least as much in education and human rights as we do in communications and hotels. This is the work of social entrepreneurs. And in this statement, he coins the term social entrepreneurship in 1978, which is a term that's been used ever since and in many different ways. And it means different things to different people. But the way I see it is a social entrepreneur innovates and scales profitable solutions to social and environmental problems, and thereby is able to tap into the large pools of capital in the financial markets and produce not just financial returns but also social and environmental returns that can actually scale to meet the enormity of the problems we face. And so that kind of financial, social, environmental returns is often summed up as triple bottom line returns. So I see that as a key aspect of social entrepreneurship, even though it's called social. Another way to think of it, and I've titled the talk, is impact entrepreneurship, which I think embraces the triple bottom line. So it's financial, social, environmental returns. And there are companies now, these days, like B Corporation and Global Impact Investing Network, which have metrics and assessment systems for measuring a company's social and environmental impact. In fact, I had to go through a B Corp assessment, and it was a very enlightening experience. So let's look at some examples of social entrepreneurs, starting with one of the most famous ones, Muhammad Yunus, who started the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh and transformed the world in many ways through the revolution of microfinance. Mr. Yunus realized that the poor had been neglected from traditional banking services, and that if they were provided a small amount of credit, they could often start small businesses that generated income that enabled them to both repay their loans and to improve their livelihood. And so he started the Grameen Bank, founded on this principle, and, for example, would give a rural family in Bangladesh a loan for a cow. And the family would use the cow to, of course, produce milk and butter and other products for their village, make money, repay the loan for the cow. And in fact, Grameen Bank had much higher repayment or lower default rates than traditional banks in his region. And then, of course, the family would bring a valuable good to the rest of the community, and collectively, over time, bring the village out of poverty into and give it buying power to participate in markets. And so this got applied all over the world through what became known as microfinance. In some cases, I think the model got abused and did not serve ultimately the common good. But certainly through Grameen Bank it did. And Grameen Bank inspired many social ventures. One of them was Grameen Phone, started by Iqbal Kadir, who I know well, lives in Cambridge. And Grameen Phone was in fact the inspiration for one of my ventures, United Villages. Grameen Phone took the Grameen Bank principle. Instead of financing a cow, financed a mobile phone, and that typically a village woman would go around in the village and allow people to make and receive calls with, and of course charge them for it, kind of like a mobile public telephone. And through the income generated from the service, repay the loan for the mobile phone and bring a valuable service to the community, improve her and her family's livelihood, and so on and so forth. And Grameen Phone became another shining example of a big success in social entrepreneurship. Iqbal Kadir and his investors made lots of money and started a very profitable telecom business in Bangladesh. And then on the heels of that, Iqbal's younger brother started Cell Bazaar, which enabled people with phones in Bangladesh to engage in a Craigslist service, offer things for sale and buy them, and that also became tremendously successful. So you can see how this kind of lineage of one positive social change leads to another. So now let's fast forward a little bit to C.K. Prahalad, who unfortunately is no longer with us. He was a very well-known economist from University of Michigan that coined this term, the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. And this book you see here is one of the, I guess you could say, Bibles of social entrepreneurship. I actually got to read a manuscript of it and before it was published, because CK was friends with the professor I had at MIT, and we were able to review it. This was back in 2001, and basically what CK says is if we look at the world's economic pyramid and we separate it into three categories, look at people who make more than $20,000 a year. It's about 75 to 100 million people worldwide. Then the second tier is about 1.5 billion people who make between $1,500 and $20,000 a year. And then the bottom of the pyramid is 4 billion people who make less than $1,500 a year. And what CK says is that the top of the pyramid has become extremely saturated. All the companies you and I can name are pretty much focused on the customers at the top of the pyramid. Forgotten, the bottom of the pyramid is forgotten about, is ignored. But this is really where the next big opportunity for growth is for companies big and small, is being able to figure out business models and products and services that are adapted for this market, that can be very high volume, lower margin probably, but very high volume businesses that can bring valuable goods and services to more than half the planet, and also produce financial returns. And so one example he gives of this is how in India, HLL is Unilever's subsidiary there, and they had a high-end detergent mainly for urban dwellers, and they were doing great. But this new company, Nirma, came along and had designed a product for rural communities, and it stripped out some of the fancy stuff from the high-end detergent and really made it more appropriate for use in water bodies, which is where the rural communities tended to wash their clothes, and other sorts of things to bring the price down. And they were terribly successful. They became close to the sales level of HLL's high-end products. And so HLL, although initially they ignored this, new company Nirma, and didn't take it very seriously, the next thing they found themselves copying them and creating the HLL wheel product, which was a detergent engineered for the rural market. And they did pretty much the same thing, and also met with some great success. So if you look at the chart here, you'll see that the Nirma and the wheel sales were quite high. The gross margins were a little bit lower, but the important thing CK points out here is the return on capital employed, ROCE, was 4 to 5 times higher for the Nirma and wheel product than HLL's high-end product for the city folk. So what he's saying here is that not only is social entrepreneurship a way to bring valuable goods and services and uplift society, it's also very good business and return on capital investment. So let's go through some other examples that were inspired by the bottom of the pyramid discourse. One of them is called D-Light. I know the founder, Sam, well. He raised money from one of the same investors I did. And he has done an amazing job of bringing clean light to over 70 million people worldwide. And what Sam realizes is that a fifth of the world's population doesn't have access to reliable electricity and are often using dirty and dangerous kerosene lamps. So Sam realized that they could harvest the energy from the sun and provide low-cost solar lamps so that people could have light at night. And this enables them to work, as you see here, be productive. Also enables children to study and advance their education, and a number of other benefits in addition to replacing the damaging effects of kerosene lamps to people's health and, of course, the environment. So again, another example of a low price but high volume business that has scaled worldwide to address a real social and to some extent environmental problem. They have actually offset 25 million tons of CO2 so far. D-Light. So let's look at another example. You remember I talked about road deaths. How would you build a business to reduce road deaths? Well, Save Life has done that. They have focused on India, which has only 1% of the world's vehicles, but 10% of the world's road deaths. So it's probably the toughest country to take on. But they have been instrumental in a number of things, starting with training first responders all across India to respond to road accidents. And this is one of the main reasons why road accidents result in death, is because the victim is not given treatment in time. And so the first responders reduce the probability of death significantly. They're also training drivers of commercial vehicles, of fleets, because they're the highest risks in this scenario. They've been driving policy reform to protect the first responders. Number one, also prevent protruding rods from trucks, which is now law, and other road safety laws. So this is another example that has scaled all across India to combat a real social problem. And we also talked about access to clean water. What could you possibly do about that? Well, here's another for-profit social venture, Sarvajal, also in India, that has come up with a model that works through micro entrepreneurs. They're set up as franchises and given basically a clean water station that allows them to produce and bottle clean water, and they are focused on the poorest communities in India, which don't have access to the clean water, and individuals who are making less than $1 a day. And they have, through innovating this business model and product, able to bring the costs of distribution down, so that the micro entrepreneur can make money from providing the water. Sarvajal can make money because it's such a high volume of micro entrepreneurs. And so far they've served 576 million liters of water to those who otherwise wouldn't have clean water. So this is another kind of example that really gives me hope for the world. Now let's look at something more directly related to the environment. This is a company called Climate Smart. And what they realized is that if a business cuts its carbon emissions, it often ends up cutting its costs and enhancing its profitability. And so they built a consulting business around that. They advise businesses of all kinds, medium, large businesses mainly, that how they can reduce their carbon emissions, gain carbon credits, and enhance their overall profitability. And they've been very successful at this and around for a while. And so far they have offset over 2 million tons of CO2. And to give an example of what 1 ton looks like, there's this cube here, which is an installation in Amsterdam. This is 27 cubic feet, imagined as carbon. They have offset over 2 million of these cubes, just to give a sense and scale of the impact. So another successful social venture, for profit, generating triple bottom line returns, and meeting, rising to meet the enormity of the problem that we're facing. So don't want to spend too long on it, but just wanted to touch a little bit on what I've been up to since graduating from Wesleyan and my journey. So I graduated in '98 and didn't know exactly what I was doing, but there was this thing called the internet and the .com boom happening in New York City and Silicon Valley. So I just moved to New York, found a job at a startup there doing internet television, and through some means ended up starting a channel there for holistic health and spirituality, and then ended up spinning that out as a separate company called WeBreathe.com, which became the first search engine for holistic health. And our mission was to empower holistic health practitioners, and we built websites for yoga centers and Buddhist practitioners and all sorts of holistic health practitioners, and link them together in this network through our search engine, and went through the whole boom and bust of the .com bubble. basically had to shut things down because we weren't able to sell the company after the bubble burst. And I was able to get into MIT Sloan as the failed .com entrepreneur that they should have in the class to round out the peer perspective. That's how I pitched myself, and it worked. So that was We Breathe. I said, I'm never going to start another company again. My God, that was too hard. I'm going to go to business school and get on a traditional career path. But when I was at MIT, as I mentioned, I took that class where I read C.K. Prahalad and The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. We came up with this idea to bring internet access to billions of people living in villages using Wi-Fi access points mounted on the vehicles already going back and forth to the villages, and to bridge the digital divide. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. And then went on to start kind of a sister company that, instead of selling that technology to other organizations, used it to become a rural internet service provider in India, which then pivoted and became India's first mobile phone supply chain for retailers neglected by the traditional supply chain. And I'll also tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. And that got taken over by an Indian payments company called Oxygen, which I was happy to hand my baby off to. And then they asked me to start their U.S. business, so that's what I've been up to since 2013, is basically a mobile money play for financial inclusion in India. So just to go back to the First Mile Solutions experience, because I think it's relevant here, academia is really a great launch pad for impact entrepreneurs. It was a great launch pad for me, and I see it as a great launch pad for many entrepreneurs who I'm mentoring at Harvard and at MIT every year. So in my case, we came up with this idea in a class, which you can see here in the upper left. There's this mobile access point that travels around these villages every day anyway, so we can just we can put the mobile access point on the vehicle, and then every time it picks up and drops off data to and from Wi-Fi enabled devices in each village, goes back to a hotspot and uploads and downloads and rinse and repeat. So for very low cost, you could bring internet access to these communities. And so that was the concept. We got into the MIT 50K business plan competition. We called ourselves DonkeyNet. You can see the picture we took here with a dwarf donkey in western Massachusetts with a PDA around its neck. And this got us, this was taken by Yahoo Finance, so the name got us some good press. Again, leveraging academia. And then the stars kind of lined up, and MIT started a lab in India, and they were looking for ideas. So after graduating from business school, instead of going into a traditional career path, which I had planned, I found myself in New Delhi incubating this technology and doing a proof of concept for the Karnataka state government digital land record program. And to make a long story short, we achieved the proof of concept. You can see the network diagram in the lower right. This was in a village outside of Dodabalapur in Karnataka, where you could see the bus comes in range right around where that red starts, and then the signal gets stronger as it approaches the kiosk where the computer was, and then the bus goes out of range on the other side. And what we were able to prove is that each time the bus drove by, you could move about 45 megabytes of data, which was pretty good. And the bus came through this village 2 or 3 times a day. So I presented the results at the World Summit on the Information Society in Geneva in 2003, and there were a bunch of NGOs there. They were very excited about the technology. They were wondering when they could get it as a product. So I realized it was time to spin it out. So moved back to Cambridge, started First Mile Solutions, and had a customer in Cambodia before we had even started the company that wrote me a check for half the project fee up front. So First Mile was actually profitable from day one and never had to take on any investment. And let me just show you here a quick video of what CNN covered on the project.
In the absence of electricity, human muscle helps generate power for the computers, as do solar panels. What they don't have is a direct link to the internet. No phone lines, no satellite dishes. Enter the Motor Man. These men and their metallic machines are the modern-day equivalent of the postman in Ratnagiri. On roads that can test even the toughest four-wheel drive vehicles, the motorman has to weave a careful path. On his bike, precious cargo of stored email that has been downloaded wirelessly to a chip inside a box on the bike. The wireless system was developed by a Boston-based company, First Mile Solutions, building on the Wi-Fi technology that's become commonplace in offices and homes in the developed world. As the bike rides up to the door of a remote school, in a matter of seconds, the email is uploaded to the school's computer, and any of the school's outgoing messages get transferred to this box. Once the motorman returns to the hub, the email is sent by satellite to the internet.
The internet and email opens up many opportunities. It's like building a highway. The highway permits transportation increases commerce and so on.
So, yes, that was the Internet Village Motorman project in Cambodia, which kind of put us on the map. And Bernie Krischer, the man you saw there at the end, was the former chief editor of Newsweek Asia. So he invited all his press buddies to come check it out, and word got out about what we were doing, and that did all the marketing for us. So we ended up getting contacted by United Nations for a project in Paraguay, Rwanda Telecom, and an NGO for another project in Rwanda. And I was going all over the world implementing this solution for different NGOs and multilateral institutions, and I learned a lot, and went through some pretty intense experiences. As you can see here in the upper left, this was after riding a motorcycle through 8 kilometers of swamp, and the back wheel gave out on me, but luckily I'd come within radio range of the pickup truck, and they came to the rescue. So it was a great time of my life of adventure and exploration. So let me just touch briefly on United Villages. I know we're getting short on time. So we started with that store and forward drive-by Wi-Fi concept, but it turned out it was a bigger opportunity in bringing goods to villages that were otherwise difficult or costly for retailers to stock. And so what we came up with was a mobile app that enables retailers to procure and manage their inventory through their phones with our app. And then we aggregated all the demand and worked with wholesalers in the city to deliver once a week. And the impact of this was that the village got access to a whole new range of goods that they hadn't had before. Things like baby formula and light bulbs and batteries and other things we take for granted here, but and that are difficult for people in these communities to otherwise get. And we also reduce the overall carbon footprint of the supply chain, because these retailers were each individually, about 7 to 10 in each village, leaving their village, shutting down their shop, going into the city 4 or 5 times a month. Right? And so we basically reduced that down to one vehicle going once a week, and offset a lot of carbon emissions. So this was the first kind of mobile phone green supply chain for villages in India that we ended up with. It wasn't the first idea that we started, but is an example of the kind of adaptation you have to make to become successful as an entrepreneur. So let me summarize. We started off, we looked at the planet, and we realized what a rare gift a living planet is. I think it's pretty clear, at least to me, that we're messing ours up, and it could be irreversible. Who knows? But I think we should err on the side of just doing whatever we can to prevent things from getting worse, so that when our kids ask us, or their kids ask them, well, why didn't you do something about it? We can say, well, we did. This is what we did. It's clear that governments aren't going to save us, and NGOs probably aren't either. We went over how NGOs really lack access to capital to sustain and scale or impact, but how impact entrepreneurship really might be the best tool we have for rising to meet the enormity of the social and environmental problems that we have. And this is because social ventures have equity that investors can buy and generate financial returns with, and thereby tap into large pools of capital. And does anyone remember what triple bottom line returns are? Anyone? Yes? Financial, social, environmental. Very good. So they, social ventures, impact ventures can generate these triple bottom line returns. And by the way, just to leave you with a parting note, CSSers, I believe, are natural impact entrepreneurs, and in fact, Wesleyan grads are in general.
Wesleyan is social impact. It's in the DNA of the university, which has been producing social entrepreneurs for decades, way before the term was even invented.
There's something about social entrepreneurship and Wesleyan that is synonymous.
I think that there's sort of a pride and identity around the social justice values that Wesleyan people have.
Wesleyan for me has always been about bringing home my world-class education, trying to make the Philippines a better place. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm trying to figure out what is going to drive me for the rest of my life. What is the reason for my being?
By the time I left Wesleyan, I just had this belief that, you know what, Sean? Whatever you put your mind to, you can do it. My Wesleyan experience did that for me.
There's a real sense of freedom and exploration at Wesleyan. I think both intellectually, but also experientially.
I don't know, just the conversations I've had with people doing crazy things and just the general lust for life that Wesleyan students have.
Wesleyan just creates individuals with a can-do spirit that won't accept the status quo.
I think ever since I went to Wesleyan, I wanted to save the world. I mean, that was always an interest. I think a lot of people from Wesleyan say that.
As I've worked across Africa in refugee crises and refugee rescue operations, I've thought about my time at Wesleyan, and it kind of helped to show me that I could do anything I wanted to do.
It's an environment that incubates the whole notion that anything is possible.
Today, Wesleyan's tradition of social impact carries on through the Planetary Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Support the Planetary Center and enable the next generation of Wesleyan social entrepreneurs.
So yeah, that was a video I produced for the Planetary Center for Social Entrepreneurship here at Wesleyan as one of the advisory board members, and worked with Wes undergrad and some of his friends to make it. This has become one of the videos that the administration uses to reach out to alumni now and help communicate what Wesleyan stands for. So we have to make this true, right? I think when we look at the kind of problems that we have, I don't think that there's really anyone in a better position than you who are sitting here right now to take these things on. You have been given the gift of this great education and all of your natural talent, and then you have the momentum right now to really rise up and face these things. So I encourage you, I challenge you, especially seniors who are graduating next month. Maybe you have a job lined up yet, maybe not already, trying to figure out what's next. I don't know if I'd advise you to necessarily start a social venture, but check out what social ventures are doing, and maybe consider joining one, or seeing how you can support the companies that are taking on these problems. So that's it. I'd like to again thank you all very much, and I think we'll do some questions.